Hey you, welcome to the podcast. This is Thinking with David. My name is David. And today's episode is a special one. I really enjoyed it. And before we get into it, just a quick thank you to my patrons over on the Patreon page for Thinking with David. There's currently 10 of you right now. 10 sweet, generous people giving to this effort. And so far, I believe it's up to something like $53 per month. And that allows me to cover the hosting fees for the podcast and the blog. And what I'm considering next is if I can get more donations, that I might be able to automate some processes, to hire someone to do some redundant work that I've been doing, including graphic design and posting on the blog. So that would allow me some extra time to just continue to create more podcast material. And I think that's really what you guys enjoy. So if you would like to consider giving, you may do so at patreon.com/thinkingwithdavid. And I highly recommend downloading the Patreon app. They have an iPhone app. I'm assuming there's one for Android as well. And on there you'll receive notifications when any new material comes up. And it's just a super easy tool to use to follow any creators that you are allowing them, whom you are allowing them to live their dream. All right. Well, let's get right into it. Today's episode. So for today's episode, my guest is Mark Kelton. And Mark's a good friend of mine who lives here in Austin. Mark is a musician, but we don't get so much into his music in this podcast. We more talk about Mark's transformation. And I'll let him explain more about that, because we get right into it once the podcast starts. And I just found it to be very interesting and largely clarifying for a lot of philosophical ideas that I was having at the time. So thank you to Mark for helping me there, and I hope he helps you too. I think he will inspire and incite thought and perhaps change in your life. So, without further ado, please welcome to the podcast, Mark Kelton.
So, when I was 23, I'd graduated college, and I got a job working out of school for just under a year, and I hit this point where I just realized, you know what, I'm on a path that isn't the path I want to be on, and if I don't do something right now to shift the course of my life into another direction,
Yeah,
I'm going to be miserable and be stuck in something that I don't want to be stuck in. And so
you felt that.
I felt that. And I had all these questions about life, existence, myself, that I wanted to find answers to. So I read that book, and there's a Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth, sitting right next to us.
That was one of the beginning ones that you read.
Yeah, I'd actually already read that twice when I came to this conclusion, but
Wow.
Tolle was big. So in a nutshell, what happened was, I decided to quit my job. I was living at my mother's house at the time. I quit my job, and I basically just shifted into all day, every day studying.
Yeah.
And I was studying philosophy, psychology, religions to a certain extent. I started doing yoga every day. First thing when I'd wake up every single morning, I'd done it for like a year, going to classes, and I wanted a deeper knowledge. My friend's mom was a yoga instructor who was an instructor of instructor, like a high level, instructor. And she said, come on over. I got all these books. I've got a crate full of books. If you want to borrow them, you can borrow them for as long as you want. And I went over. She literally had like a trunk with 200 plus books on yoga in it. And she's like, just take whatever you want and read it. And so I pulled out like 7 or 8, and she'd pulled one out too and said, I think you're going to like this one. And so I got into reading them. And, and even before I get into all of that, I'll just say too, so like I had all these questions that I wanted answers to, and I didn't want to wait till the end of my life to learn them, which I felt I'd seen around me. Like people wait till they're like retired or like, in their 60s to like answer some of these basic questions because they're just stuck in the survival loop of life, right out of the gate. They're like, I got to survive. I don't have time to think about this stuff and find the answers. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to do it now. And so I'd get up every day, and I started reading this yoga book. And like,
do you remember what it was called?
Yeah, the Sivananda Companion to Yoga by the Sivananda Yoga Center. I've recommended it to at least 50 people at this point.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
I recommend you get it.
Yeah, man. I'm gonna check it out after this.
And it's a companion manual. It's something they give to people that are going to go to a yoga center and to learn to be a yogi, basically, like to be a trained yogi. And it's just chocked full of information. It's 120 pages, and it's all valuable, applicable stuff to, one, learn asanas, learn how to sequence a routine, pranayama, which for those of you who don't know is breathing exercises, and kriyas, which are cleansing routines, and meditation.
Oh, wow.
So it talks about and gives you like a kind of a detailed pictograph, like a picture with like a paragraph telling you like, this is what you do and this is how you do it and this is the sequence and da-da-da-da. And so it just comes down to the practitioner to then, in that setting, and when they're at a studio, they're probably getting guidance as well, but it was just me on my own, like in isolation. And so I was just basically trying to apply everything that they said. Oh, and there's also a section on diet. So immediately when I got into the reading, I realized I've gone my entire life with eating meat and like basically like at least 2 meals a day every day, and I and so like that was the first click, and I was just like, well, okay, well I need to test what being a vegetarian is, and the literature I'm reading is telling me that it will benefit my yoga practice and growth there, so I'm going to test this out. And that was one of the first things I just started testing was diet, and then learning these practices and literally just getting up every day at dawn and spending, an hour and a half to 3.5 hours trying to learn all of the stuff. The movements, you have to practice them. The breathing exercises, you have to practice them. When I first started doing the breathing exercises, I could barely even, like it hurt. It hurt to breathe.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people develop bad habits when it comes to, breathing and exercise, and you have stiffness in areas like and when you start learning things new and stuff correctly,
yeah,
at first there's some soreness, and it took me a while to like kind of adopt all of it, but over the course of about a year to a year and a half, I pretty much learned most of, I learned all the asanas, which are like the movement poses, and I learned pretty much all of the breathing exercises, and for an extended period, and I was doing it all just consistently the whole time from there. And I was a vegetarian at different levels. First I tried out being a vegan, lost like 30 pounds.
Really?
Yeah. In like 3 weeks, I lost like 25, 30 pounds, something like that.
In 3 weeks?
I don't know officially how much it was, but
you were getting skinny.
I got skinny, and like all of the fats and like things that were stored in my my brain and my body from eating the meat over, time, just like all got sapped up and used up really quickly. Right. And so there's like a big shift that happened there, because it was like my body was wasting away all this shit, basically. And, but then that didn't work for me, because it was, I was just eating fruits and vegetables and nothing else for 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And so I basically, over the course of time, built a diet back up from scratch.
Okay, that was like your reset.
It was a reset.
This is like a resetting period in general.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, you're like relearning everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and part of what that boils down to, and the conclusion that I actually developed going through this whole year and a half inward odyssey, is, there's information and there's knowledge. And we've talked about this. There's information and there's knowledge. And you get a ton of information shot at you on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And true knowledge is only through having tested that information and understanding its application for yourself.
Yeah.
So, this whole thing was about finding my knowledge and understanding, not just in the theoretical or hypothetical of, this is what I read in a book, but I read this thing in a book, and then I tested this stuff for myself, and these are the conclusions I've developed. And so yoga and diet, that was one level, and that all plays into, intellect and emotion and sex drive and intuition and ego, all of that stuff. And then, psychology and philosophy. And I read a lot of Nietzsche.
Yeah, man.
A lot of Nietzsche.
Wait, what works did you read by him that you recommend?
That book, Zarathustra, was huge. I felt like that was me.
Zarathustra?
Yeah. That's about a guy who goes up, who goes into the up into the hills and has realizations about the self, and then tries to come back down to society and tell everybody about it, but nobody has the perspective to hear his words in truth. It's just like a dissonance, and because they don't have a perspective to understand his words, they don't have the inner knowledge. And then he just keeps coming down, and eventually he slowly finds the outliers here, there, and I truthfully think that, and I'll have to do a little more research because I haven't confirmed this, but Full on the Hill by the Beatles, I'm pretty sure that's about Zarathustra.
Really?
At least that's what it feels like to me. Because I heard that song, and then I read this years later, and I was like, oh my God, that's that song.
Yeah. Wow, man.
So thus spoke Zarathustra. Twilight of the Idols is good. It's about celebrity culture.
Dude.
In the 1850s, he wrote this. In the 1850s. And about just the whole cult of personality and building up someone. Society, for whatever reason, it's just it seems like an automatic function of a mass of people will for whatever reason gravitate to an individual and create a cult of personality around this perception of this person.
The perception of them,
right?
Not actually who they are. Yeah.
So there you go, celebrity culture. And he's talking about this in 1850 or whatever it was. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah.
And what book was that called?
Twilight of the Idols.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a ton of other ones I read too. There's one on morality, the evolution of morality. I think it's called Genealogy of Morals or something. And
what did he have to say about morality?
Well, just I don't remember all the details on that one. But it was just the evolution of a moral code itself. As a function of society, and how different societies have different moral codes.
Yeah.
And how they evolve and are created in the first place. And then The Birth of Tragedy I really resonated with, because it was about the inception and evolution of the tragic play as an art form.
Oh, is this poetics? Or
What do you mean poetics?
So Aristotle wrote some book called Poetics, and it sounds similar to what you're talking about. Yeah.
I'll have to look at it. I haven't read that one, but it's probably where he started his thought on it. Maybe. Who knows? He as far as I know, Nietzsche read a lot. There was no TV back then. There's no Instagram.
Yeah.
Wasting your fucking time.
Dude, wow. Well, I want to, real quick,
Yeah.
can we get back to the morality one?
Yeah.
Because I was just talking to a friend the other day, and his question was like, can we have morality
Yeah.
without religion? And I thought that was a very interesting question. And what I saw it, I kind of reframed it as like, can we have morality without mythology?
Right.
Without story?
Right.
And what do you think? Like, what's your take on that?
Well, I'd say, one,
Mm-hmm.
can you elaborate on what religion is to you?
Yeah, man. So that's a big question that I was struggling with yesterday, was for some reason trying to define what religion means. And I think it's super complex.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that's kind of where I ended up, was like defining it as storytelling with archetypes built into it, like deep archetypes.
Cultural archetypes.
Yeah, like the how would you even Oedipal mother, Oedipal mother, and then like the tyrannical father, and the hero's journey. And so that's kind of where I ended up, was like, can we have morality without those things, without those stories?
Yeah, and I think too, like, so to your proposition, I'd say yes, because you're effectively talking about a moral code that is in place to help society function better. And by society, that could be tribe, that could be family, to help a group of people function in a more efficient way. I think that's why these codes exist in the first place. And then I think what happens is, over time, the allegory or the story is, I don't know what the term would be, but it's turned into dogma. It becomes dogmatic, where people then will take the stories as this
Literal.
is literal.
Yeah.
And there may be like literal context and beginning points for these things, when they're formed as story or allegory. But then over time, then taking a story as just fact is like, that's that whole. It comes back to what we were saying before. You're just accepting information as truth and knowledge without testing that for yourself.
Yeah, the lived wisdom.
That's experience. A great term. I've never heard that. Yeah, lived wisdom.
I might have just made that up. I had
lived
heard
wisdom.
It from someone.
That'd be a great brand name for something. That's your publishing company name.
Lived wisdom. Welcome.
Yeah. So, because everybody has different definitions. So, thanks for clarifying that. Because, like, I also think that there's the delineation between, because you can call something a religion for yourself, right? And you like can have a conscious understanding of like, okay, this is just like my way of being. These are my codes of existence. So this is effectively my religion. It's just a term, you know, in that respect. But then like you extrapolate that to like a global situation with like, a collective, and then the whole thing of like accepting, okay, these are our accepted truths, but they're not really necessarily truths. So these are our accepted mythology or story, I think is what is, yeah. So I think that the codes come first, and I think that the religion is an evolution after that.
Yeah. Wow.
At least that's my opinion.
That makes a lot of sense, man. Well, so let's keep going with your story too. Okay. So it's been like, how long were you living the monk life? And so you went through all these books, right? Like,
yeah.
And what came out of that?
A lot of transformation. One of the big things I immediately started practicing was to free myself from distraction. Hence the de facto monk existence. I didn't go to an ashram. I wasn't like in any kind of like, archetypal school of thought or anything like that. I wasn't like officially a monk or wearing a robe, but I was like, in self-imposed isolation, qualifying all this information and really thinking deeply and meditating and trying to understand myself and then consequently the world and universe around me. And so it lasted about, it was a year and a half from when I went in till when I disengaged completely.
Year and a half.
You know, like there's about probably 12 or 14 months where I was solidly in it. And then a couple months after that where I was like, okay, I've figured out the things that I had questions about, and I'll elaborate more on those too. I figured out the things that I have questions about, and now I'm choosing to re-engage with quote unquote society rather than like going off and finding an ashram and just like living that existence indefinitely. Like I didn't think that was my path. I mean, the questions I had were all surrounding, like, what is reality?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's all these religions, there's all these schools of thought and people, philosophers. Ton of them say different things. Like what's really happening here? Like there has to be an absolute truth of existence, right? Like there has to, like, scientifically, you know, like what is the truth here?
Yeah.
What's the I understand the intent behind all of these disparate, you know, words and stories, but like what's the central thing that's happening under all of them? Like that's what I was really trying to understand. And so yeah, I read all these books. Toll was great in helping me come into the present. I had a lot of dissonance, you know, leading up to that point in terms of like living in the future or the past. And whenever I was in the present, I felt like just joy, but I didn't know how to control it. And a lot of people don't.
What do you mean by that? Like control your joy?
Being conscious of moments when you are not present and bringing yourself present. And when you're not present, generally speaking, you're either future tripping or past tripping. And to that point, I had no control over that. My mind was always constantly moving.
I see.
Couldn't sleep at night because like my mind would never shut off. So I was an insomniac up until this point. And
wow, dude, this is a big transformation. Yeah, man. Wow.
So what helped was Toll was great on that level of like bringing me into the present, like finding that. And then the yoga was it amplified my ability to control that and get myself focused. And so part of like moving my distractions I mentioned before was like I removed all posters from the walls, and I would not talk to anybody for like weeks on end. And you know, as soon as your mind receives information, it's like you're immediately or at least for me, my type, like, you know, I think there's different types of directional awareness personalities. For my type, like I'm like very distracted by information. Like if there's something coming my way, I'm like, you know, immediately going to look at it and like try to, you know, like pay attention to it. Like I can't. I argue with my brother about it all the time because it's like he's like, just don't pay attention. It's like, well, that's not how I'm wired.
Yeah,
you know, people are wired differently, and the way I'm wired is I just perceive this stuff and it's like it's a distraction. So I try to remove as much extraneous distraction as possible. Anything that was going to pull me out of being in my flow and thinking and meditating on everything that I'm learning. And so that was one layer of it, and then like not talking to anybody. And I'd go out every, you know, because you get one thing I learned in this whole process is the human, or at least, you know, me as a person, you need social interaction to feel healthy and normal. It's like one of those things. One of the lessons from all this was, and it actually ties into something my great aunt told me, who was actually the person who recommended most of this literature. She was a nun, And then she became like a new age, healer type person. And I connected with her when I was in college, right before I went through all this. And she's the one that started recommending all these books to me. And so like I started getting into, she recommended Toll, and and then I like started like going off and finding some others. And I would sporadically connect with her, and she would recommend like the next thing.
Oh, she was ready for you.
It was like
every time.
Well, it was like every time I was ready, I would reach out, and I'd say like, well, what can I read now? She's like, try this. And so I totally lost my train of thought. So,
well, I believe where you were going was just like your evolution.
What I got out of it?
Yeah. Well, like, I mean, we can think about it together, I guess.
Thinking with David.
Yeah. This is part of the experience.
You gotta have under like a theme song that comes in right then.
Well, you were talking about trying stuff out personally.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, ultimately, I was removing distraction. And then I was reading all this literature, and it was, I was trying to maintain my focus on it as much as possible. And what I learned was that, like, you can do that sporadically, but you do need social interaction to like feel sane. Right. And like, I would go so deep into it at times where I would like I'd be completely lost to like, the outside world. I would just be in the ether of, myself, or like, the universe within myself. Cause we all are just the universe. Right. So it's like tapping into that, like, just like baseline of just like om or ah, or like whatever, it's just like, there's no before thought, so to speak. It's like, and so I'd go into that, and I got so deep into that towards the end where it was like, I lost my abilities to like communicate with people.
Wow.
And I had to relearn that, because I'd been so far into it and I'd spent so much time in myself, inward, that it felt like painful to like talk to people.
Yeah.
And I had to relearn that. Yeah. And so like, part of the like whole transformational process that happened was, as I was going through doing this yoga stuff, and I was vegetarian, and, I was effectively celibate, and like, I was like, harnessing all these energies into the growth. Like what I thought, I'll just tell you what I thought my focus every day was, I want to maximize my growth every day. Growth.
Wow.
I want to maximize the amount.
Intention.
Yeah. Every single day. And what I realized before, when I was getting into this, was, people run on cycles where, at least in the society that I have experience living in, American society, it seems like the cycle is get up in the morning, go do some shit, go take a substance at the end of the day, and manipulate your physiology, try to go to sleep, not totally sleep well because of that substance, and then wake up groggy and start the whole cycle again. And at observing that, specifically in college and through my own personal experiences, I realized that being in that cycle, you don't fully... I saw people in a stalemate of growth for extended periods of time, where it's like, because they were on this treadmill, they weren't learning from what they had experienced and then growing as a person emotionally, or, general maturity wise. It just felt like I saw people at standstills. And my thought was, okay, it must be because they're on this treadmill of just like substance use and like not register. What happens is when you go to sleep, I think your brain automatically, if you go to sleep at the right time and wake up at the right time, and that's relative, I think, per person, that's when you maximize the healing effect of sleep. And when you put something else into the equation, either substance or like you stay up way too late or whatever, you don't get the full effect of that healing cycle of your existence. And so then the next day, you, having not maxed out on your sleep, don't get the greatest benefit and the greatest growth. And when you're doing something like regular substance abuse, you actually are preventing certain aspects of that sleep cycle to take place, to actually facilitate that. So what I realized once I started getting into this is by just focusing on growth every day and making that the focus of my life, I was able to leapfrog ahead. It felt like. It was like I wasn't in a standstill. I wasn't in a feedback loop of, you know, birth and death and wake and sleep. I was like on this, like, I don't know, man. It just accelerated it accelerated my growth.
Yeah. And so by growth, what were you seeing or what were you feeling? Like, was it an internal feeling like I'm growing, or were there material things that were coming into your life that were reinforcing that?
So I'd actually separated myself from like material existence to a certain extent. So it was all internal for the most part. Some of the stuff. Okay, so when I got deep into like the readings, and I started going. I got to this one thing. It's called the Fourth Way. Gurdjieff, he's a philosopher from like the turn of the the end of the 1900s. One of his students wrote a book called In Search of the Miraculous, and in that book, it's really esoteric and it seems like super out there. And like I saw it at the store one time, and I was like, because I was looking for more literature to like, you know, grow, and I looked into it and it just seemed like way out there. And then I asked my aunt like a couple months later, like, what should I read next? And she recommended that book.
Right, yeah. You were ready for that out there then at that point.
And so I just started getting into it. And I like read like the whole half of the book in like, I don't know, like 2 days. Like I just like did nothing but read the book. And then, you know, once I got into it, it basically, what the dude is trying to do is put together a cohesive philosophy of everything. Like try to come up with like, you know, like what do they call it in physics? Like the God equation or whatever, like the equation of the universe, right? Well, like he was trying to do it from like a philosophical perspective. And so he like tied together religion and science and like esotericism and, you know, philosophy and like physicality and like all these things, like trying to like come up with like an understanding of what is reality.
Yeah.
Right. And at that point in time,
what you were searching for too.
At that point in time, and like using the best knowledge they had at that time to like come up with it. So like through that process, they developed a bunch of thought exercises, to borrow Einstein's term, like I think that's his term. Basically like looking at things in a certain way, and it like exercises the mind. And the big takeaway is understanding that the body is a machine and functions in a certain way with certain inputs and outputs, and it's like it's a design.
Yeah.
And once you understand that design, then you can better use it to your, you know, whatever your intention is. And that's physically and psychologically and like, you know, all of that emotionally, like, and so I got into perceiving all this stuff and going through these exercises, and it started shifting my mind. Like it started just, I don't know anybody listening that sounds like fucking out there, but like,
dude,
basically just like, it's like going to the gym.
Yes.
It's just like going to the gym, but like psychologically. And so I was like going through these thought exercises, and I became conscious of like the drivers on the human condition, right? You've got your emotional matrix, you've got your rational matrix, your ego, somewhere in between, your intuition and your sex drive. And like there's like at any one point in time, these things are directing, it's like directional focus, right? Any one point in time, one of these or congruence of these things are directing your attention and driving your action. There might be more that I'm not like, you know, expressing or aware of subtly, but like those are like the main ones as far as I could tell. And at that time, once I realized how each of those things I meditated and I went through the exercises, and then I understood how each one of those sort of independently operated. And then when like the ego one clicked into place, I realized like how it clicked into place between the others. Right. And from there, just like everything started shifting forward. I became, I mean, effectively people say ego conscious, right? Like that happened. And then I started having I would do deep meditation every night. Like I'd go in savasana after doing a couple hours of yoga in the day and studying and practicing whatever for another 12 hours. Then going into savasana every night and meditating. And I was almost not going to share this part, but it's what happened. Basically every single memory I'd ever had over the course of 3 to 4 months it automatically started popping up for me and then getting recontextualized and restored in my memory bank. And this wasn't something I was looking to do. It just happened. It was an automatic result of going through all of those other things for the prior year. This is a year into it.
Yeah. After
going through all these other things, growing and on all of these levels, with the yoga and physically and diet, that maxing stuff out for me and removing the uric acid from my body, which I think made my body and mind more malleable. There's a lot of uric acid in meat. So once you remove that from your system, your joints are more flexible, and consequently also your mind is more flexible, your whole body. So
you've been vegan for a while?
No, not since. But during that process I was.
Okay.
I'm mostly vegetarian now, but I mean, part of one of the lessons I learned from that whole experience is that's not the best for me long term.
Yeah.
My body, I think we're all different, but my body responds with some poultry and some fish in the diet regularly, a ton of cheese. I eat a lot of cheese. But I stay away from red meats and
okay.
I try not to eat pork now because I realize it makes me feel like I'm going to have a heart attack sometimes.
Yeah. And so with sorry to get you back on track, with the recontextualization of your memories.
Yeah.
Can you explain that? What did that feel like? Yeah. What was that experience like?
So I was already, as part of my daily practice of existence, I would lay in savasana every night before I went to sleep. What I found was just laying in that position, that's corpse pose, laying on your back, it's a yoga pose. By laying in that position still, meaning no movement, I found it as a reset. My body would heal, and I was talking about this with my brother actually the other day. You can actually feel after, you've done other asanas and breathing exercises during the day, then getting into a corpse pose, and especially at night right before bed, your body will start to go into these healing cycles and start shifting energy around or, blood or whatever. And you could feel it. I could feel stuff would pop into place that may have been out of place, in my back or my hip or whatever. And then the more still you are and the more present you are in your body, paying attention to your pulse in your ankle or something, wherever, paying attention to just being present in the moment and not thinking about something else and being still, meaning not moving your body at all. It provided healing and resetting, and it would be the start of a sleep phase. And when I started going through these psychological shifts, I was already doing that every night, and all of a sudden, all of my memories just started popping up and started getting recontextualized. And I was talking about this last night with some people. Basically, what that means is you can remember things not exactly the way they happened through a veil of either your emotional context of the situation or your egoic context of the situation. And you can project onto that event that happened a layer of emotional response.
Yeah.
And when you remember those things until you've cleared that layer, you feel pain. You can feel pain or feel something. And basically what happened was when I realized that those layers were in place and where they came from, the emotional matrix, the ego, and then how those each independently actually operated, then I had a deeper perspective on everything that I'd ever experienced.
Oh, wow.
And the way my body did this automatically I wasn't seeking for this. I didn't even know this was a thing. And I still don't have a way to really describe it. I've only heard it talked about in, I think, 2 forms of literature. One was On the Road with Jack Kerouac.
Really? He talks about it?
Yeah. There's a passage in that book that talks about this. And there's one other place I can't remember. I wasn't looking for this to happen. It just started happening automatically. And over the course of the next several months, because I was doing this growth focus thing every day where I was in that and spending like 14 to 16 hours just like fucking, ripping it on information intake and testing. And, it just shifted. And it was like, it started coming up where like a memory would come up. I would see it through the new veil, or I would remove the veils that were there. Mm-hmm. And then it would get restored. That's what it felt like. It was like it would pop up into my head, and then like it'd feel like it would go back into the memory bank after like re-experiencing it, for lack of a better term, of like, the memory.
And are you visualizing the memory? Is the memory coming back to you like visually, and you're seeing it and you're reliving it, and then it's like, boop,
that's how it happened at first. Uh-huh. And then it got to the point where it was happening so fast that it was like too fast to comprehend. Mm. It was like a Rolodex flipping in my head at one point in the middle of it, when it was like the heat of this transformation.
Yeah. And
the whole thing took like 3 or 4 months. And then like at the end of it, it started winding down. And then when you're young, before you're fully mature as an adult human, mm-hmm. You can store things emotionally, energetically, like maybe things you don't know how to deal with, or things you don't know how to contextualize, because you don't either have like enough life experience, or your brain just isn't wired yet to contextualize a situation or something, right? Mm-hmm. So then that stuff, that all came up at the end, and that was more like, it was like like emotional scarring from youth. Like both my father and my uncle, like they had like, drug and alcohol issues. And so like that stuff, like the scar tissue, emotional scar tissue is what I call it, would come up, and in like it was more of like a symbolic visualization. It was like less about like direct experience. It was more like, this is scar tissue that needs to be healed. And so it was like I was deep in the subconscious, it felt like, and things would come up visually that I would then like interpret and deal with, but it was like symbolic. It wasn't, it was like abstract thought within the subconscious or something.
Yeah. And
so then that was like the end, that was the tail end of that whole process. And then at the end, I just like felt like a totally different person.
Yeah, man. That's really cool. So basically, in the beginning stages, right, these are, you're recontextualizing memories.
Yeah.
That weren't necessarily like traumatic.
Right.
They were just memories.
It was just every memory I ever had.
And then as you went on, like those you could flip right through almost.
Well, it wasn't even like I was intentionally doing it. It was just happening. But yeah, they were just flipping.
Wow. And then you got to a point where like, okay, these are deeper like traumas within my psyche.
Yeah.
Basically.
Right.
And so those needed a little bit more work.
Yeah. It was like a different, it was a different method of approach, so to speak. And again, all this stuff was just happening automatically. Like I don't think I was consciously doing any of this. It was just happening.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
Yeah. And then after all that happened, I'm a musician. So like one of the things I was researching this whole time was music theory and like developing that side of things. Cause like I had a resistance to learning the theory. I was a musician forever, but I'd never learned the theory. Cause like when I was a kid, my dad was a musician, and then he passed away when I was really, really young. And he was trying to teach me the theory when I was like, 7 or 8 or whatever, right before he passed. And then I always had a resistance to it. But then I learned theory this whole time as well. That was one of the things that I wanted to learn and focus on. And at the end, then I like record, as I was going through this, or like at the tail end of feeling all this, then I was like, okay, now I've like got this new skill set. I've like dealt with that stuff. Mm-hmm. I've learned all of this theory. And so I recorded an album and released an album before I like reintegrated with society.
Wow.
That was at the tail end.
And what was the name of that album?
A Deal with Destiny.
A Deal with Destiny. And so everything you had read up until that point, do you think that influenced that?
Oh yeah.
That art? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I like stripped down everything I was doing to like some core principles with that as well, to like start songwriting from scratch. I basically did everything I did with like the philosophy and the psychology and physicality with the yoga, and I did the same thing with the music, because like I'd played for a decade or whatever already, but like I was like lacking these like the language.
The language, yeah.
I was lacking the language to express what I was doing to others, and the deeper context of what knowing that language does to the music itself or the art itself, like by learning the basics, so to speak, by learning the rudiments of how this thing operates, then your execution of the art changes. It evolves.
Yeah, man. So one of my interviews, I spoke with one of my best friends from high school. His name's Jake. And he's been through similar transformations, but very different at the same time. And one of the things he discussed was creating art in the beginning stages of his life, and then going through his transformation, and then creating art after that transformation. And so how has your mission or like goals of creation changed in everything that you create since that transformation occurred?
I would say that it's more I have a more applied approach to what I'm creating or what I'm experiencing. It all comes down to what I'm experiencing. I mean, I'm looking to live in the present as much as humanly possible. Right. And for me, the highest I get is when I'm creating music from like scratch. Right. Like when I'm improvising on electric guitar or singing or whatever, it's like that gets me the highest of anything in life. And I surf and I snowboard and hit fish and all that stuff, but like that gets me like so high. And so I think what I learned and how it applies to the art itself is it's just I've exercised all these things, like all these different layers of myself, that it's evolved me, it's changed me as a person. And so then what I'm doing is that therefore I think more in I would say that I've always looked to tap into that present. That's what the music did for me before I was able to alter my focus to be in a like present state as much as humanly possible. Before I was able to do that, like through meditation and psychologically, music was the only release. It was the only place I could find that. And so instead of it just being like this drug or like this escape from the madness of the self, now I am in myself, like not in that madness as much as humanly possible already, and then the music is just like this like heightened layer of it. So like I'm high right now talking to you. I don't do drugs, people. Like I don't
no, yeah, man.
Like not at all. It's like all meditation, breathing exercises, fun. So like the music, I think and like the music, like I'm always creating, like I'm always writing stuff about, like I'm always trying to like bring people into the present.
Yeah, that's what I was getting from what you were saying.
Yeah. And so like however I can do that the best, I'm constantly growing and evolving and learning and trying to do that. And the music is constantly evolving. And wherever I'm at or whatever energy's around me, it definitely influences what the inputs affect what comes out of me. So what you're saying is you're limited by what you're feeling in the present moment as you create that art. I wouldn't say I'm limited. I would say that that's where I find the highest resonance of present. Like art is nothing if art has no value if it is not a true reflection of human condition. Because why do we look at art? Why do we experience art except to better understand ourselves? So for me, I find that is the most profound for me, like from my experience, when I'm pulling in a real emotion or story or trying to capture a real feeling.
Yeah.
And so that's where like the art comes from, and that's my experience with it. And then like whatever, it comes out as it comes out. And like, like I obviously have context because I'm a musician. So I'm like huge into music. So like all of that context goes into the product that gets created out of the experiences and like all of the learning and evolution that's brought me to this point. So it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing, and it's directly influenced by what I'm experiencing. Whether that's what someone else is experiencing around me that I'm like resonating and like reflecting and trying to like understand. And so like it's like inspires me to create a song, or how I feel because of something that's happened to me, and I'm trying to capture that emotion and create a song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful, Mark. That was great.
Thanks.
Well, there's 1,000 different directions we could take it, but I'd like
life?
Life? Life? Question mark? Well,
Life exclamation point.
Well, I was curious, like, so during, I kind of also, I mean, this could be taken back to your quote unquote monk phase.
Yeah.
Or we can just talk about like what's going on right now.
Sure.
But in terms of like dreams, like were you dreaming during that time? And what are your thoughts on dreams? Just because I've been like super curious about dreams lately, and some of them have been like intense and like full on narratives, And so I'm wondering like, what's your dream life been like so far?
My dream life.
Yeah.
This is a great subject because it's actually something I've thought about a lot too, but I don't have any conclusive like understanding of what dreams really are. It's like I've thought about it a lot, and as far as I can tell, it seems like it's just our brains resetting themselves at night through the sleep cycle. And if there are any things that are, because we're intellectual and emotional and physical, I feel like stuff comes up in dreams that like maybe our brains are sometimes trying to work through, and sometimes it's just our brains going through the sleep cycle without trying to work through something, And then there's like the whole layer of okay, well, so what's reality? And is there this, is there this other layer of reality? Are you tapping into, the quantum field? And like, I have no proof. Like the way I contextualize things and I try to operate is like, what is my direct personal experience that qualifies something as true?
Yeah.
And I have no direct personal experience, and I have seen no examples of something that is like scientifically saying this is true of there being like another layer of existence. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I'm just saying, like, to date, it doesn't seem like there's any evidence that it does, except for there's like, and again, I don't really, it's like a quasi, like, there's like a cultural discussion about this stuff, right? And like people talk about it and have opinions based on a lot of information, but without any direct personal knowledge. And so like I've just been like dying to ask some Tibetan Buddhist monks about this, because like as far as I know, that they're like the deepest meditators on the planet. I actually went to the Dalai Lama's birthday party Birthday party. He did a talk. He did a talk in Irvine a couple years back, and it was like for a small group, like 250, maybe 300 people. And I went to that, and I like totally chickened out on asking him. I needed to ask him, what is astral projection? What is out of body experience?
Oh.
And I just didn't ask the question because I was like insecure. Now I would ask the question. I'm not in that headspace anymore. But it was like the real questions about this stuff is like what I want answers to, and I don't have any answers to it. It just so coming back to dreams, like I really, as far as I can tell, it's your body just functionally resetting itself overnight, and like that's just how it operates. Mm. And sometimes you're working, and sometimes you have realizations and work through shit because you're smart. We we have the ability to think things through things, like, cause and effect and all that. And so like things come up, and then, and I'll tell you this, this actually comes back to the other stuff. When I was in deep states of meditation, in that phase of life, I would ask questions to quote unquote the universe or God, or is it myself? I don't know. But I would ask questions and I would receive answers.
How quickly would the answers come back to you?
Almost instantaneously sometimes.
Wow. Yeah.
And like, people talk about downloads from like, the universe or like archangels. I'm finger quoting for anybody who's not looking at this. Like, I don't know. Like, I can't tell you that those things exist because I haven't had any direct personal experience. I don't have the knowledge, but you ask, if deep states of inward reflection, you ask questions, you may receive answers. I did. I don't know what it was, but my deduction is there is no duality. Right? The universe and you are the same. So when you say you ask questions to the universe, you're asking, you are the universe. So if you see what I'm saying? Like, there is no other, it's all one. So when you're asking questions to the ether or whatever you want to call it, you're really asking also yourself. So when you get answers, I don't know. Like all I know is what I experienced, and then came to deduced, basically like my opinion. It's an opinion about where that information is coming from. But effectively, if you're asking a question, and oftentimes it's stuff that you like really already know the answer to, like, should I be with this person, or should I, do this thing or whatever? And you're wrestling with it because you know that there's something that you should be doing that you're not doing, and you ask it, and you get an answer, and it's like the thing that you're like, oh yeah, I should do that. It, like, who's answering that question? I don't know, but you're getting an answer, and it might be yourself.
Yeah, man. Well, so I want to hit on that duality piece. Yeah. Because that's another thing that I've been very curious about recently. Is there's two narratives. So it seems to me like one is that everything is one, right? Maybe more specifically, the narratives that I'm speaking about is like, you are already whole.
Right.
This is one thing that's being fed to people.
Right.
Is you are already whole.
Right.
Everything is one type thing. And then there's this other narrative that's like, things are more complex than that. And there is good and there is evil in the world. So like, what do you, I'm getting a smile here. So like, what do you think about, like, is everything just it sounds so like hippy dippy, but like, is everything just love and everything is just one, or is there good and evil in this world? Or are those, so here's another thing I was wondering is like, maybe there's different realms of reality, or like different levels of analyzing it, you could say. So like maybe at the absolute level, yes, everything is like non-dual. Everything is one. But then at more granular levels, like we have to make some distinctions between these things so we can communicate them. Right. Maybe that's
right.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it was a different book or if it was a subtitle on the genealogy of morals, but there's another book that Nietzsche wrote, the I can't remember what it's called. It's something good and evil. Basically, like the creation of good and evil, or like the birth of good and evil, something like that. And it might have even been that same book. I can't remember, but it basically talks about this exact thing. Like where does good and evil come from?
Yeah.
So if you look, if beings with intellect did not exist, would there be any good and evil?
My first, I don't know.
What is good and evil? Like, what is good and evil?
I mean, my first thought is like it's a human construct almost. But then, so would not the absolute also be a human construct? Like that idea too? So it's like, where does it's mind melting in a way.
So we can't perceive the absolute to a certain extent. Like the context of the absolute we can't perceive. But you're right, it's all mental perspective. And that's what I was getting to. That's the core of what I was saying is good and evil are relative perspectives. Based on the context of what you perceive good and evil to be. And every single person on this planet probably has a different relative construct of what they perceive good and evil to be.
So is it kind of like the idea of like, I mean, Hitler, right? Thinking that he's doing good things in the world by like killing millions and millions of people. And to him, this is good. This is not evil. But to the rest of the world, it's like, no, man, this is bad. This is really bad.
Right. So that's my point is there's relative context and relative judgment of that. So it's like good and evil in and of itself is a relative construction. You know, like everything we communicate, every word that's spoken is a relative construction. And we're never going to be able to fully describe the absolute because experience and language and all the layers of the human condition are inherently limited. So you can never even, you can't really, this, and I think this is what like, it's been a while since I've read these texts, but I think this is like what Buddhism and all that stuff is talking about. And honestly, like if you know, the tenets of Christianity and like probably like several other religions as well, it's like there's beingness, you know, like you read Toll, he'll talk about all this stuff, you know, the experience of existence without the layers of construct is real, is the purest experience you will have in this lifetime. So the moment you try to start putting labels on it and try to describe it, that's a limited, you have a limited ability to communicate what you're experiencing to others. And that's really the only reason why we have language in the first place, which is to communicate. Being to being.
Yes.
So, you know, I think that good and evil on like a collective scale is, you know, we have an agreement, we have like a perception of, you know, and it's also, it comes from our interpersonal experience. Like, I think my opinion is that like emotions were developed to, interact with other beings. Like, I don't mean like aliens. I mean like other beings within like your tribe or your collective, like your species, like whatever it is. Like, I think that one of the reasons that is a thing in creatures is because it helps us survive.
Yeah.
Right. And when you become an intellectual being, humans, then you're able to start describing that stuff. And the codes of conduct, which we talked about before, as being like collectively adopted by a group, which are going to be different group to group to group. Then you just define what those good and evils are. you know, like I do my best, and I'm, you know, again, I'm only human, to not pass judgment on anyone, because my relative perspective and judgment in and of itself is like effectively an illusion. But we have these societal constructs of judgment to manipulate action, right? So like define good and evil, and prevent people from doing certain things that are a detriment to others in the collective or the collective as a whole. So it's all relative.
Do you think it's implicitly built into us though? Kind of like what you were saying, like animals have these codes of conduct, right? We're intellectualized animals, and we can describe what these codes of conduct actually are, and that's kind of creating that duality. But that like that good and evil is residing inside of us in a way.
Well, again, I mean, the concept of good and evil is going to be relative to your condition, right? Your society, your personal experiences. You know, we all like, you know, I mean, there's laws. People are going to, like, some people live by the laws and some people don't. You know what I mean? I think that they come from, like, okay, so like the Hitler example, or like someone like him, right? So it's like, it's the reason that the rest of society feels like that, you know, why he sees it a different way and everyone else sees it another way, is because it seems like he lacks empathy, right? Like there's like this spectrum of emotions that people are imbued with from birth, and it can be manipulated over time. They can be manipulated by other people. Like they can, you know, evolve. But like human empathy, you know, like the feeling of peace and joy of experiencing another person's presence effectively, right? And I like that is like a core tenet of societies like that, like, or like, you know, that starts to, those are the feelings that we feel that then shift into the laws that we have in place, right? And like or rather, that's not a direct linear evolution. It's like we feel something, we collectively feel something, we develop a code of existence, and then we say this thing is wrong, and then we say, if you do this thing, this is what's going to happen to you. And then there you go. Then you have like a code and you have a law, and like that feeling is then codified into like the greater structure of society. Right? And so I do think that they stem from those feelings, but the intellect and the variety of cultural experience and history on this planet provides different subsets of what those definitions are of good and evil, and like, you know, the laws that spring out from that. That's my opinion. Yeah, it's confusing for me personally, because I saw kind of two different directions that you were heading in, and one was like everything's morality is relative, and then the other was like morality is agreed upon by everyone. Well, by the collective. So like we have emotions. As humans, we have a set of emotions. I don't know what any other creature experiences on this planet. There might be other emotions that exist that we're like not aware of, right? There might be other types of something that I've really thought about, that I've been really curious about, is the evolution of the psychological processes of a being. Right? Like biological evolution. Psychological evolution, directly, you know, subject directly. Psychological evolution, but not separate from physiological evolution, right? Like, so like it's all one, right? As a unit, as a unit evolves over time, like when do Like when was the ego created? And like how many creatures on this planet have an ego? Like how many creatures on this planet have the same types of emotions we have? How many, we call it intuition or the survival, instinct. Like where did all these things come? Like when did they start?
Yeah.
Like there's like literally no way to even like.
Yeah, it's crazy that they even came about.
Yeah. And my deduction is that they all had a function in survival.
Every emotion that we have,
everything that exists within us, everything that we are.
Yeah.
It all had some function in getting us to where we are now. Like I have this thing, and forgive me if you follow a different line of belief or thought. But like if you look at like a human baby, or like any animal baby, right, in the womb, you see it go through like all these phases and of like structurally, right, and like it looks like to me that like a human, for example, like there's like a zygote, and then there's like a phase where it has gills, and it has
a human baby.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I can remember, it's been a while since I've like looked at this stuff, but like I just remember as I looked at it, it was like there's like a phase where it's like in the womb and it has. I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, then I'm way off base. I probably should research this before I talk about it again. But like, there's like all these phases of evolution in like the human condition itself, even to this day, and it's like all that stuff gets truncated into the womb, and it's like every animal. Because like if you accept evolution as like a thing, right, and then you look at like the evolutionary record in fossils, and then you look at where we are now, and not just humans, like everything, and then you look at like the growth of it's like things are changing over time, but it's all coming from somewhere, and it's all been in a different form at some point, and multiple forms over the course of time. And so those forms don't just evaporate. They're still part of this condition that we're experiencing now. They just get truncated. And it's like, like humans, like we think that humans lived like, 30 years or something was like the average lifespan or something, like, I don't know, like, 10,000 years ago, right? Or a million years ago or whatever. But now we're living like this long. And like, even if in the last 150 years, you look at like the average height of people, and it's like, we're growing over time, right? But everything that was before is still part of our makeup. It's just getting truncated. It's getting like compacted. And we're getting smarter. We're getting wiser. We're getting more physically fit. We're getting more adapted to this environment.
Yeah.
And everything that's come before is still part of our path to be here now. It's just getting truncated. And so like, I don't know, that's just like something I've like thought about, but I don't think there's like any feasible way to like come to any conclusions on it.
Yeah. Well, it makes
not right now.
sense in a certain way. Like everything builds on top of the next thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's actually a book that I also recommend. It's called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. And it talks about how the evolution of scientific thought has changed over time, and like the process in which it changes. How like a new idea, like how like a new idea will come up, and I forget the guy who wrote it. I forget his name, but it's called The Structure of Scientific Evolution, I think, or thought. A new idea comes up. It gets a hypothesis gets turned into a hypothesis. It gets tested. There's proof, or there's information that says, okay, we think this might be the case, and so then a theory is created, and you have a theory, and as it's been tested, one guy is doing this, right? And it's like everybody believes something. Like everybody believes the Earth is flat. It's like that's the classic, right? Everybody believes the Earth is flat.
Wasn't that like a myth? Or,
yeah. Well, so that's
like that people even thought that at one time.
Oh, well, maybe not. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. I wasn't around then. I just have the information. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We'll go with that then too. I'm with you.
But let's just say, like, as an allegory,
sure.
everybody believes the earth is flat because everybody's only walked on the surface and they like have no other information. Mm-hmm. Well, then some guy figures out how to calculate the curvature of the earth. And then based on that knowledge, they, extrapolate or come to some, go get more information and come to the conclusion scientifically that the earth isn't flat. Mm. But he's the only one with access to that information. And he's the only one that understands it as a truth and can and knows it, at least just based on the information that he has. Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole sequence of how it goes from one dude with an idea to this is what obviously not everyone. Mm-hmm. This is what the majority of the scientific community believes as a universal truth or an accepted truth about the nature of experience on some level.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a whole book on that. It's fucking awesome. I recommend reading it.
Wow. Wait, so that process has changed over time though? Like it didn't used to be that way?
No. It just talks about it as being a thing, and it talks about that arc of how it goes from an idea to it
adopted
being
something.
Right. And that whole evolution of process, like how that occurs.
Yeah. Cool.
It's awesome.
Dude, that's sweet. Well, let's see, Mark. This has been great.
Yeah.
So far. I mean, I'd like to maybe the one of the last things we can hit on is energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I use the restroom really quick?
Please,
we'll pause?
Please do. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. We'll pause. Well, what do you say we just wrap it up?
Okay.
Because this has been awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can people get in touch with you?
Wait, are we on right now?
Yeah, I said.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just keep going.
In. Okay. The best way now would be just reaching out to my Instagram or Facebook. Mm-hmm. So at Mark Austin Kelton. I've got a page, Mark Austin Kelton, and an Instagram account. So you can just message me there. Instagram's probably better because I try to stay off Facebook as much as humanly possible because no offense to the Facebook people, it is a colossal suck of time.
If you're caught scrolling, which I do sometimes.
I used, you know what I call it? This going into the F hole, getting sucked into the F hole.
Yeah, so stick to the Insta for Mark. And yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on. We'll do it again soon. There's so much more to touch on. And appreciate you, brother.
You too, man.
Cool.
So
the podcast isn't over yet. Mark, being the talented musician that he is, I asked him if he could play a song for us before he leaves, and he did. So I'm very thankful for that. So please stick around for this song and enjoy the musical stylings of Mark Kelton.
All right, this song is called Remembrance of Solitude.
You've lost your love again. But our hearts, they do mend. Your fear is growing old. Oh, oh, oh. When your life is standing still, your soul's weeping, feeling ill. Your fear is growing. And the heights, they make you dizzy. Long lost lover left you there, did he? Your fear is growing old. Old, old, old. keys in a chest of drawers. You don't know whether they were his or yours. Your fear is growing. Your fear is growing old. 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 Your fear is growing old.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving 1 minute of your time to giving this podcast a review on iTunes, if that's where you're listening. Consider giving it a 5-star review, but be honest. Let me know what you're thinking, how you're enjoying the podcast, what you're enjoying about it, what you aren't enjoying about it. Any feedback is very helpful. And we'll end it there. So, subscribe and stay tuned for next week's episode. Episodes are every Wednesday in the AM. And I'll see you, or speak with you rather, next week. All right.